Nobody here, just Gary. Woo. We're echoing, Amy. It's because my thing is turned up here. Give me 1 second, I need to find my pen. Darn it. Thanks, Murph. Okay, yep. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is a regularly scheduled Fort Myers Beach Town Council work session. It is Thursday, September 5th, 2019, hurricane-free. It's 9 a.m. If you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes, we did. So aside from no hurricane, we also have no Bruce Butcher. He has an excused absence. Yes, ma'am. Next item on the agenda, or first item on the agenda, is the Estero Boulevard Rehab Project update, but we don't have anyone from the county here today, so we'll move right into number B, which is the Matanzas Pass Bridge maintenance.
You know what?
Yes, sir.
Before we skip over A,
Sure.
can I just ask Roger on the record to ask a couple of things for them? For when
Absolutely,
they come?
Joanne, sorry about that.
Just real quickly, with regard to the Publix, I know they changed to a slot drain there. They ran into some problems and whatever, but the whole detour there and how it's working is a problem I'm getting complaints about. It's not always obvious when it's closed off. So I would just ask that they somehow better mark what's going on when they close that off.
We've expressed that to them, and we will reiterate that to them, but I think at this point, they're just trying to press forward to get the opening open, but I will re-express that to them.
And the other thing was, it seems like our timeline may not be so timely anymore, and I was wondering if they might send us a new timeline when they
idea.
can. I was just looking at the one we have, and I don't think it's jiving right now with what I see on the street. That's all. Thank you very much. Sorry.
I'll just throw in another one that Joanne will like, and that is Estero Parkway has a new landscape plan. And I'm just wondering if the county will be doing such a plan for Estero Boulevard.
It's funny you said that, Anita, because I put here that we were supposed to have a M&P meeting with the landscape committee. It was promised some time ago, so thank you for bringing that up.
I'll skip that meeting if I could just get a plan like Estero did.
And while we're throwing stuff in, when I was in downtown Fort Myers recently, I noticed they do have in their median in downtown Fort Myers the native ground cover stuff. So the city of Fort Myers is doing it, so we should be able to.
Yeah,
Instead of the grass.
So I think the issue is twofold, just on the landscaping. One is that the county, has a minimal budget and a minimal plan for Estero Boulevard, and therefore anything beyond that would require financial contribution from the town, from their vantage point. And then, of course, they would have concerns about frangibility if the landscaping was struck by a vehicle and other things of that nature, that even if we tried to do enhanced landscaping, they would perhaps limit the types of species, et cetera. But I think we should press forward and attempt to beautify our main street. I will also ask them for the fill in the thermometer type of plan that Council Butcher has been asking for on their progress.
Roger, it isn't just our main street, it is their #1 money-making street in the entire county. They make more money on that street than any other road in the county. So you would think that that would make beautification some sort of priority. And again, if we could just get some plan for them, then we would know what we need to step into if we wish to, or augment, or whatever.
And they did state on the record that they have $1 million built in the budget for landscaping, and I hate to see them spending it on that grass when, as Rexanne just said, at least throw in the native vegetation. If you're putting something in there, can we at least do it where you're not redoing it and wasting what budget they have? Let's not waste it.
Ray, anything? If I could just touch on one thing while we're here. Mr. Sandelli, the new commissioner, is available the morning, half of the day, on September the 13th. Is anyone else available that morning? If you'll just look at your calendars real quick, I'll ask our clerk to send Charlotte an email and let her know that we're all good for that.
13th?
September 13th. And it doesn't have to be the whole time. I thought maybe we could start with maybe a little breakfast gathering or something here. And then, okay, Joanne's, and then maybe each of us could talk about something that we'd like to show him. And we could do that. And you're available? I have in front of you, okay.
I'm more than likely.
Friday the 13th, yes, it'll be a lucky day for us, because he really is, I think you all will like him. Okay, so would you
Are we say
answer?
9, are we thinking 9 a.m.?
I think it's 9 to, maybe Michelle could clear that up for us while we're sitting here, but I think
9
it's,
till 11 open, and we'll just figure it out?
yeah,
Okay,
something
fine.
like that. Yeah, he's coming here for the day. Okay. I was super excited he accepted that. All right, and not just for a formal meeting, so he could get to know us and know some other people in the town. Next item on the agenda is the Matanzas Pass Bridge Maintenance discussion and update on FDOT. Roger?
This question came up at a recent council meeting, and we just want to provide you with background information. Our arrangement with FDOT, which is a maintenance agreement to sweep the bridge, ends in July of 2020. The amount FDOT pays us annually is roughly $9,100 per year. They pay that to us quarterly. Our street sweeper, which is used as part of that maintenance effort, as well as for other things we would have to do, even if we weren't in the maintenance agreement with FDOT, costs us $6,800 a month. So
Roger, does
clearly,
that-
you can see there's no relationship between what the sweeper costs and what FDOT is paying us.
Is there a painting maintenance as well? Who does that?
Say again?
Painting maintenance as
The
well? Who does that?
FDOT paints the bridges periodically.
They paint it, okay. Discussion, you want to start, Ray? Any questions on that issue?
What's the question? To renew the contract?
Well,
or-
nothing's up for renewal today. I think the impetus of the question was a budgetary
Is it enough money?
question. Were we receiving the true cost of sweeping the bridge? And I think the obvious answer to that is no. FDOT's contract prices are based on statewide pricing, and therefore, when you live in areas such as ours that tend to have higher costs for contractual services, you can easily see that the statewide median cost is much lower than what it would actually cost us to do it here locally.
So it's a question of,
Do you want to do it and augment it, just like we were talking about the potential of having to augment the landscaping on Estero Boulevard?
Joanne, you're leaning in.
Who does the South End Bridge? Big Carlos Pass?
That's the counties.
It is county. Okay.
Be interesting to have a cost from the county on what it costs them to sweep that bridge.
We can inquire and ask them if
In the
they
big bridge
have
is
a
bigger,
cost center
but,
there.
my opinion is that either they do it or they pay us what it costs us to do it.
I think
It's a little blunt,
my
but
experience with these types of things is just that the FDOT's level of maintenance
Very low.
for things such as this, which they consider to be aesthetics, is minimal, and we, as the entranceway to our town, think it's very, it's important. It needs to be not only swept, but we have people out there on days when it's not being swept, just picking up trash and litter by hand. So we try to keep the entranceway as attractive as we can.
maybe Mr. Sandelli could be some help to us on this. That is the most iconic view in Lee County, from the top of that bridge, and it's important that it's maintained well.
And it crosses
Absolutely.
an estuary
Sure.
that's a critical estuary. So you can't just have trash flowing
Right,
around it
right.
too.
Roxanne?
Roxanne's leaning in too.
Well, I was leaning, because I don't know that we really have a lot of choice. They have, it's nice to stand here and say, yes, they should do this, but this is what they're going to pay us, and our other choice is to not pay them, which means we do it all ourselves. So I guess I'd rather get what they're giving us rather than nothing.
Well, I think our choice is to not
That's
take
a
the,
point, Rex.
not take the contract and not do the maintenance and,
No.
and then, deal with it the way we would deal with any other agency we had an issue with, is make complaints when it's not looking in good condition and hope they respond, or continue with what we're doing now.
I would say continue what we're doing now. It's not wonderful, but it's the best of the options that are available to us.
That's what, I think that this is a situation not only this town is in, but many, many municipalities who have FDOT facilities that run through their town are all in the same boat.
How often do we sweep that bridge? Is it daily,
Well-
or is it?
Well, we have people out there several times a week picking up litter by hand, and then we sweep it. I believe it's no less than once a week, sometimes twice, depending on conditions.
That's the
can-
problem, if you let it go to their schedule, they may get to it, they may not get to it, and then we're dissatisfied with their service. I can see that. So I tend to agree with Rexanne that we're probably better off just the way we are, and take what they give us, defer it, or use that against the costs and keep it going that way, keep it clean.
I don't think it hurts for us to express what it really costs us.
Well, we can, and
I think of it,
if you want to renegotiate it with them, I don't know. Roger's telling us that doesn't sound.
I'm not saying it will help, but if everybody says, everybody who is in the same boat, shall we say, expresses what the real costs are, maybe at some point you get at least a small increase across the board, who knows?
That's something that TDC might be interested in, no?
No, I think it's
Why not?
really, if it's anything, it's perhaps a League of Cities type issue to go to the state and say, hey, if you're going to ask us to do stuff, you have to pay us our real cost, not just some calculated number that doesn't tie back to the
Maybe it'll
true
be
cost.
something to talk to the commissioner on the 13th.
We
See
could
if
add
he
it to
could
the
offer
list.
us some help. Okay, so we'll stay as it is, explaining to them what our costs are and see if they budge.
Right, and just to be clear, the next time we'll be revisiting this is in March.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. Next item is signs and murals. Joanne, I'm going to let you lead this off.
Me?
Uh-huh. Think about that picture I sent you.
So excited, and the reason we're talking about this, of course, is because one CPD has a mural in it already. Other commercial properties are talking about it. So since they're talking about it, we need to definitely define the difference between signs and murals. So the way I see it, or I'll just make a few points, and then everybody else, if that's okay. First of all, I think we need a definition of a mural, and when I look up a definition of a mural, it's usually a painting or other work of art executed directly on a wall. And then you probably also need to define work of art, because, it's a painting of high aesthetic, artistic quality, something giving high aesthetic satisfaction to the viewer. I think that that's important. Also, a mural does not have lettering. We would not want lettering, where a sign might have lettering. No logos. We probably need to think about, do we want to constrain the themes or not? In other words, if we're working within a brand of the island, are we trying to keep a certain island and marine and environmental type theme, or do we want to constrain themes at all? Do we want to control the percent of coverage of a building? Do we want to make sure that they are well maintained and that they aren't being used as a reason to not maintain your building. In other words, the building has to be sound and well-maintained in its own right, and the building, and the mural upon that also needs to be well-maintained. So I think that's important. Do we want an approval process? These are going to be very large impact. They're going to be far greater than the size of signs that we
Any
allow.
kind of sign.
So do we create a process where it goes through the LPA, let's say, or something, you know, don't forget, like the Historic Preservation Board has this aesthetic thing about signs. You know how they have that thing where they can determine if something is of particular aesthetic value? Maybe we establish the same kind of a thing for that. Do we allow them on residential buildings, or is this going to be by zoning district? Because next thing you know, I've seen in neighborhoods where people have intentionally painted things as a gotcha to their neighbors who they're not happy with. So I think that, you know, is this commercial only, or is this by zoning district? And then how about if we get graffiti on it? Sometimes paintings on walls inspire others to write. And so we need, I think, probably something to address if there is graffiti, how quickly it must be covered up. I know one day at one of the places that has movable lettering on their sign, I drove by it, and, you know, somebody during the night had
Made it something clever.
creatively really changed the statement, and it needed to be changed back immediately. So with graffiti, that can be the case too. So how quickly, is it 24 hours? How quickly do they have to at least paint over the graffiti, especially, you know? And then obviously, I think that anytime you give somebody the benefit of something, you have to have it's a privilege, you know, to have this. And so then we also have to have a fine built in, you know, I mean, you just have to, because how do you hold people to things otherwise? So the only other things I saw then when I looked at our packet, and I'm looking at the sign ordinance, you know, there are different things like the definition of maintain, the definition of frontage. In other words, are they allowed on the front? Are they allowed on the back? If it faces a residential neighborhood, is it allowed on the back facing a residential neighborhood? I noticed on page 56, we have a definition of wall sign. Any sign attached to or painted on the wall of a building or structure. We need to make sure that those definitions are all separate. And then on page 56, I mean, we have prohibited signs. Is there such a thing as having prohibited murals? And then we also have exempt signs. Is there such a thing as exempt murals? That's it, so.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to reemphasize a point that the councilor made, and that is that we, you know, if you decide to move forward with some legislation with respect to murals, I think we need to have a very clear, very hard line between murals and signs, to the extent that we would make sure that a mural is not a sign. There are certain rights and privileges that have recently gone to the Supreme Court about signs that will probably have an impact on our sign ordinance. And I wouldn't like to see, or wouldn't recommend that that extension also be carried forward to murals. And the other point I just want to mention is, the council mentioned words. I think the other thing we'd have to be careful about is logos. But I'll let you all continue to discuss it. But I just wanted to point that we really need to go in our sign ordinance and take out anything that would reference murals and vice versa.
And one last thing, on page 52, I noticed there's also alteration. We need to make sure that there's something in there about alteration, that once it's there, you can't alter it, so.
Rex, comment?
I have nothing to add to what Joanne already indicated. She hit all my points.
Ray, anything?
That was very good, Joanne. I would
It's
think
why
that.
you're going to miss her.
Exactly, I'm missing her already. I would just say that maybe we could, with those points being made, that's sort of our direction that we want to go in. we could refer this to the LPA, and maybe they could research this as to, with the Florida League of Cities, if there's other ordinances on the books throughout the state of Florida regarding murals and so forth, that maybe we could glean some information from that and then come up with our own ordinance here.
Okay, I'm going to show you this picture. I just showed it to Roxanne, and so
Oh,
that.
you should never have shown anybody that. I'm sorry, wrong one.
So I am a huge fan of murals, provided that they are art.
Lovely.
And I know that art is a discriminating thing, and it is to me, it isn't to others. But the picture I've just shown, and I'll show it to Michelle too, so she can see it for the record. I've shown them has really made this tiny little spot where the ferry comes in Spain, where I am in the summertime. Everyone now talks in relationship to La Señora con la Sombrilla, because it's a picture of the lady with an umbrella. And it just sort of defines that place in a very different way, which was, bars and restaurants and whatever. It's given a whole new impression to this town, that one mural. There's another mural that I'll find too and send to you all, that in another small town that's like a throughway down this road, this woman is a ceramic artist, and everybody said they could never find her. So she had someone who is a famous muralist in Spain paint her entire building, and it's like a Dali funky. It's so interesting. When I find the picture, you'll see it. And it's now become almost a tourist attraction for people to go and take a picture. But I agree on a couple of points, and I think maybe I said this to Ray one day. I think it was during a work session. A long time ago, back in the land of Oz, the council, stepped away from design standards as far as, what did we want, what were we going to say it had to look like, and we did that because, for a lot of reasons, as you can imagine. But it's something I regret. I think that if we're going to move forward with this, and I hope we do, that it should absolutely be by application in some way, so that there is a review board for the mural, and it's not just random painting. I absolutely agree it should not be advertisement in any way, other than the fact that there's a lady painted with an umbrella, and it says you're in a nice summer spot. And I do not think it should encroach whatsoever in residential areas. I don't think this is something that I can go and now paint my house with polka dots. No. I agree with all of the notes that Joanne touched on, and to that end, I really think that we not only need to just give it to the LPA for a sign purpose, but for that discretionary process that I think the town will have to go through to end up with something like this painted somewhere, and not
Smiley face.
a pelican smoking a cigar or something, So anyhow, I think it could become a very large part of our branding to keep that funky element that people love about Fort Myers Beach, but not having it be random in nature. I'll just say that word. So I love the fact that we're pursuing this, and I would hope that the LPA would listen to this discussion in their contemplations. And Joanne, maybe you could even go to the LPA meeting when they discuss this to kind of tell them what we're thinking about. And I'm going to forward them some photos and issues, and
The town manager or Jason will give them direction.
give them
on-
a full
If you
thing.
didn't, if you
Okay.
came in late, I couldn't tell if you were here for the whole thing. If not, I got a little list here. So
Okay.
what I said.
And this excites me because it's a way to give a place a sense of place.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir?
considering you'll have a joint session with the LPA later today.
Oh, yeah, we could bring it up. Good
We
idea.
could bring it up.
Hey, thank God you're here. Next item, beach vendor guidance. This is confirming all PAL and PWVL locations for the 2020 beach vendoring. I did get a note from Holiday Water Sports from Sharon Faircloth telling me that there was a mistake on one of the lists, and it is, let's see if I can find it. You all probably got this too.
Yeah, I think she was correcting who was using a particular area.
Also got a note from Ginger Weber. I'm sure you all saw that one as well. Okay, so
So our question or issue that we wanted to bring before the council is, we met with the vendors, and they have come forward with several suggestions on changes that they would like to see in the ordinance. We believe that in some cases there is some minor and more significant overlap with the 500 feet, notwithstanding that we may have a vendor incorrectly labeled and on these maps that were provided by the former environmental tech prior to her departure as staff work. So the question for council is do you want us to embark on, I think, what would be a significant effort to try to revise this ordinance, address some of the concerns the vendors have brought to our attention. We have some staff concerns that would require council clarification. Do you not want overlap? Is 500 feet the right number, et cetera? Minor overlap is okay. Things of that nature. The permit renewal period is upon us for all intents and purposes. One of the things that we would, if nothing else, we would prefer to do is make it on a calendar year basis versus on a October to September basis. So those are some of the issues that are potentially before us. Some of you who were here in the past, understand with these types of issues that for every person you please, there's a person you're not going to please. So be aware of that if we're going to embark on this adventure of opening up this issue. And then I would say, last but not least, and I hate to be the person to say this, I wish there were things we could do for $100 a permit, but there really isn't. Or so, and I think, if we're going to open up the issue, we probably should take a look at that as well.
as in the permit should be increased.
It's just, a lot of effort for very little money for the town.
Ray, you want to comment?
I would be interested in looking at reviewing it again, getting their concerns out, and also whatever the concerns of the council are. So if that, I'd say without getting into a big deal, but it's always a big deal. So, but I'd be interested in listening to the concerns. And I agree with you, Roger. I don't think that's pretty nominal, $100 with something such as that.
Sam?
I hesitate to reopen this can of worms, having been on the council before when it was opened. And I find that although I love all the vendors and like them as people, they often come to us with very self-serving changes. And I haven't been receiving a lot of complaints about how things are now. So like I said, I hesitate to open the can of worms. If the staff feels that there's something that we really need to fix, I'm not against doing that, but I would be in favor of let's really limit this and just fix what the staff feels needs to be fixed. I remember it turned into a big brouhaha last time. I had multiple meetings with lots of different people, and a great deal of it was self-serving. And I think we've been fair to everybody at the present time. We have to balance the crowdedness of the beach and the safety of everybody with the needs of the business people, and I feel we've pretty much achieved that balance right now, so I hesitate to mess with it.
Go ahead.
Actually, I concur with you, Rexanne. And I think, some of the vendors say the same thing, it's working. The number of vendors, how they're functioning, the distance apart. I wouldn't touch it other than anything that's essential to the town. I will say the one thing I do hear is not so much about the PAL and jet skis, but the chairs, that they have to be inside the ECL lines, landward of the ECL line. They have to be on the property. And that the public has a right to be between that ECL line and the water. From Sterling north, the entire line of the beach has an ECL line, and the public has a right to be seaward of that ECL line. The vendors' chairs do not have a right to be there. That is state and public land. Now, south of Sterling, there is no ECL line, and it's actually the wet sand, so it actually that's a tighter space. But, and that plays to the concept of the fee. In all honesty, there's a lot of monitoring. The beach is a very significant asset, and these commercial vendors, it takes a lot of work with our environmental group and keeping up with it. So, I understand the town's point of view with regard to the fee. It's not an easy one and done. So that's it. I wouldn't open it, though. I would enforce it and.
I've been swung around by the debate. I'll take your word for it.
Oh, and
I
here's-
wasn't here for that last go
Bingo.
around, so, but,
It was kind of like
I was
Pandora's
here-
box opening, right?
I was here at the original,
Yeah, the
but,
original one.
but not the last go
Which was
around.
equally as difficult, if not worse.
It's true, there are a lot of personalities in
Yeah.
that group, but they're all older now.
That's true.
It's still running against the wind.
I agree. I agree with what everyone has said here, I got an email from Summer Stockton complaining about access. The access was actually down in front of the cottage, and I think that we need to do more monitoring there so that people understand that that the public has the right to access the beach and cross the beach and set their chairs up and the whole bit. And there might be a little education that needs to be done there, just FYI. I don't know if you actually read that or not.
I
but
did,
was
and
gonna
I just
follow
want
up
to,
on you with it
speak to
today.
those 2 points when the council finishes its
Perfect.
discussion.
I'd like to speak to that same point. I had a long conversation back and forth with aerial views and whatever, and in that case, that individual actually was on the cottage's property. And I explained to them how the cell line worked, whatever, and they know now where they have a right to be. Now, if the commercial chairs are over the line and they're prevented from being over the line in the future, they know that they have the right to speak up. So I just wanted you to know
Good.
that I had
Oh,
a
good.
long
Good.
interaction with them
Good.
on that.
I was just
so.
going to bring it up today, but okay, great. So I think that everything is pretty clear here. Are you clear on this, Roger?
I am.
We don't want to open Pandora's box,
Well, and
especially when
in
it's
light,
working.
in light of that, I don't know that we want to open it with respect to the fee right now. If everything's going to stay static,
Okay?
it's probably best that just everything,
I
including
would
the fee,
just
stay static
agree
at this
with,
point.
Joanne that the chair issue needs monitoring.
Well, I will tell you that, in light of the email and whatever, I have reiterated to our Public Works manager, and she has to her base staff to closely monitor that the folks with chairs on the beach stay within their defined boundaries.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of special events. Roger, you want to lead this off?
Well, I'll just mention that I believe it was Councilor Hastafas who had some concerns or how, I guess I'll use the word minor, special events were being treated, and wanted to have a discussion with her colleagues to see if it was worthwhile to look at the code and look at our process and make some changes. So I'll
Roxanne?
turn it over to her, I guess.
Thank you.
I've done some research. I would say that one thing that I found that was surprising is that I didn't seem to find that there was any basic definition of special events that a lot of towns agreed upon. It seems to be wildly all over the map, which is unfortunate. There's nothing good we can copy. However, in contrasting our definition with other definitions, and I pulled up Marco, Longboat Key, Town of Palm Beach, I think there's one other one in here, but anyway, Sanibel, and Bonita Springs. Ours is really wide open. Compared to the others, it encompasses almost everything, whereas other towns tend to, they don't block off the same things. They all have, like I said, have differing definitions. But they do try to keep some people out of the loop, out of the net that we throw out there.
Example?
Well, our net, our definition, the fifth word of our definition is any. A special event is any social, commercial, or fraternal gathering. I mean, it's so wide that it's pulling in everybody. I went back and looked at when we passed this, and I actually voted for it, and I remember the discussion that I had, and it was not the people that are sitting out there right now that brought that definition to us. And I remember that I said to those folks, I have concerns about this. I think it's too wide. It's going to be pulling in people that we don't intend to pull in. And they said, oh, no, don't worry about it. So I trusted them, and I shouldn't have, because we are pulling in too many people. And I think the thing that we have to think about the first thing we've got to do is write a new definition, because everything flows from that. And the first thing we have to think about is, why are we doing this? We are doing it because we need to make sure that traffic flows, that there's not trash, that kind of thing. But we shouldn't be forcing a small nonprofit group who's not causing anybody any trouble to have to go through a process where they fill out an application and pay a fee and all this thing when they're not bothering anybody and they don't need to be looked over. So I would like to look at how we can make our net smaller. And I understand that that's not easy to do. This is going to be something that I think is going to take some work. I think that we've got to look at our definition and be saying, we've got to include in our definition those things that we need to take care of. A special event is an event that is on public property. Of course, we need to be regulating that. A special event is one that impedes the flow of traffic or causes parking problems.
So much of a better idea.
Those
Just a
kind of
much better
things
idea.
than this wide net
Yep.
where we basically include everybody. The other thing is that some cities specifically exclude nonprofits from a fee, or they have a reduced fee for nonprofits, and I would like to see that. So without pontificating too long, I've got other things I could say, but I'm not going to keep talking, because I think the important thing is that we look at redoing the definition and look at it from the viewpoint of what is it that we're trying to protect the citizens from, and include those things in the definition.
Roxanne, I'm going to jump in just because this has been, since we were first back elected in whatever year that was, 2014, this has been an issue for people, and it's been brought up several times. And are you willing to take this project on?
Oh, sure.
I'd like to forget about crossing out and highlighting and everything else. I would just start fresh. And I think that would be a great effort if you'd be willing to do that. I agree with everything you've just said. Joanne?
Whoa.
Yep.
Whoa. That's a little scary to me. And I understand the point about the definition and the
designed to make you
nonprofits
run.
and whatever. But this is not what's making me not run. But in the definitions, though, I think that there's a very valid point made in our definition. activity conducted on private property that's not authorized by the certificate of use or certificate of occupancy. And I'm gonna give you a couple of examples. We have a lot of rentals, and when you live on the beachfront, you find that everybody wants to rent a house that holds 6 people and have a wedding with a reception that has 60 people on the beachfront. That is not really authorized by the use or certificate of occupancy of that
Let's say
structure.
it's not a rental. Let's say it's your house. If you are going to host a wedding in your
I'm having
home,
I'm having a wedding at my house. Okay, yes,
Okay.
let's say that.
you're
Okay.
having a wedding at your house.
I'm not, by the way, but this is, yeah.
But you're having a wedding at your house on the beach, or I'm having a wedding at my house.
Right.
Uh,
Okay, well, I will tell you that I have in the past, when I've had a large number of people at my home, I have arranged with another property that has adequate parking for my guests to park,
You're a good neighbor.
at that property. And so, whatever, but not everybody is a good neighbor, so no. And it's along private streets. So anyway, I just want to mention a couple of things about the definition. I think it's really important that we recognize that some properties just really don't have that certificate of use for that. Like the Women's Club, it's huge. It's got tons of parking. They're nonprofits. I can see that's a place that, but it's residential around. They'll be respectful with the noise ordinance in place. That's not a problem. But other places are in little pieces of property that do have an impact around them. So I'm still worried about those things. As far as throwing everything out, it concerns me. There is also the recurring special events, this one section too, about weekly over a period of 1 year. We already have farmers markets that are more than once per week. So there are parts that are out of date for sure. But that being said, as far as starting totally from scratch, I'm not sure that that's necessary. I think that there's some wisdom in this chapter 22.
Let me couch my comment there then, Joanne. I mean, there's nothing I dislike more than having an ordinance in front of me that I cannot easily read. And when I've got to just basically hunt for the underlined sections or the crossed out sections, it just drives me nuts. I want to be able to see easily, just like the public would, what we're talking about. And so it's from that point of view, maybe I talk more about starting, when I was a kid, I used to sew, I used to love to sew a lot, and I would rather create a garment from start to scratch than try to alter something. Altering was just something I hated to do. And so altering this, if I was going to do it, it would be easier for me to start with definitions, permit required, start with the headlines maybe, but after reading this and contemplating it, write it so that I don't have to look at this and hunt for what it is.
And my other comment with regard to, and Rexanne, I have a passion for certain things. You do, we all bring things up. But I'm not sure when it was that we have these things written by a town councilor as compared to our town attorney and the LPA. So.
I'm not gonna write it.
It kind of sounded like Rexanne
No,
had
no,
that.
no,
and
no,
we
no,
write
no,
it.
no,
So
no.
I just
didn't
want to
mean that
clearly
either.
define what we're doing here.
Yes,
Trust me, I don't want to write it.
But
I want to work with people on writing.
exactly.
But yeah, for Rexanne to be the liaison with Mr. Herron and then working with the LPA, that's awesome.
And I think, Joanne, my response to you would be, the example that you gave falls within a definition that I would come up with, because one of the things I mentioned was parking. If you're going to give a wedding and there's not enough parking on your property, then yeah, you probably fall in because you caused a problem because of parking. But if I'm going to have a wedding at my house and there's going to be 4 people there, I shouldn't have to have a special events permit. And
And that's another touchy issue, because, I'm a homesteaded person at my house. A lot of the houses around me are rental properties. Do they have the same right to have a party when they're renting that house for a week as I have? I'm just saying it's a topic you're gonna have to face, because people sometimes rent homes to have parties.
Well,
And
sure.
we know that it's happening all the time. We've had several complaints about that. I'm just suggesting, I'm not telling you what the answer is. I'm suggesting that it's something that needs to be discussed.
And it's becoming more of an issue in our quiet zone neighborhoods.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
the special events statute is not going to solve that problem. You have to solve it via other enforcement means. We've got to target on what is it that we're doing here. We're talking about special events, not people that are violating the noise ordinance, violating the short-term rental ordinance. That's a separate thing with its own special. We can't be using everything that we've got to enforce other problems. And the special events permit isn't about that, in my view.
Murphy?
Whatever you come up with, I want a 20-year exemption on the permit for the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Other than that, I have no comment. No.
Patty would be thrilled.
No. Right, Patty? Okay. No, I tend to agree with Rexanne there as well, that it needs to be reworked by the definition, and we could solve a lot of problems with that, just starting right there. This is one of those ones that things change over time, and this can be relooked at again, and probably should be. So other than that, I don't have anything else to say, but that I'll look forward to the further discussion on this as it comes up.
Okay. Okay, Rexanne. Anything else from anyone? We'll move on to the next item, which is amendments to LDC Chapter 34, Chapter 6, and others. Whose request was this?
So I think this is work that's being done in conjunction with our staff review of the land development codes under sort of
excellent.
the glitch strategy. So I'll let the planning staff.
Good morning, Sarah.
Good
Hey,
morning.
congratulations on your wedding. I didn't have a
Thank
chance
you.
to tell you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Oh, wow, I didn't even know. Congratulations.
It was very low-key. But thank you.
There was not a parking problem.
No, no parking problem.
Did you have a permit for that? Most of it?
It was on a beach in the Keys, just two of us, so
Nice.
it was easy.
Nice.
Just 2 beach chairs, that's good.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Sarah Probst, Community Development. The last time that this was brought up, it was discussed by the previous council, I believe January 22nd. And at that time, there was a long discussion about changes that you guys, well, the previous council was interested in seeing. We incorporated those, and it was brought up that it should be taken to another M&P. So that's why it's here. It's previously been to the LPA, the council, and now it's back to M&P. So that's sort of the history of where we're at with it. And all of these changes have been to clarify what staff believes the intent of this code was, but it really was unclear. Some of the items were recommendations of previous council also.
What world was that? Okay. Joanne?
I have all my notes from those discussions in January that I put in here, but I'll just start right out. Packet page 135, it's with regard to when existing major structures that were built partially or fully seaward of the 78 coastal construction line. This part underlined, repairs to existing structures are permitted without a special exception. Expansion is not permitted. The whole intent of that section was that when those structures are over the EC and they wear out, let's say it's a big deck that was built out over whatever, and when it wears out, it needs to be brought back. And so I did not support this red underlined on page 135. The wording in that little segment needs to be that you come back to the EC. I mean, we either protect our EC or we don't.
This was
So
our discussion when
That
top
was
of the
our-
mess.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
So the previous discussion, I went back and I listened to it to know that I understood fully what was said. So structural components cannot be rebuilt, repairs can occur. So repairs to the primary structure can occur, is what the discussion was. For instance, if there were a hurricane and there was damage to the roof and it was part of the primary structure and it was across the EC line, because there are some older homes that do cross the EC line, and there are
Correct.
some older commercial establishments that cross the EC line. So the idea would be that if there was damage to the roof, rather than saying, nope, you can't repair it because it's over the EC line, you can make that repair so the structure doesn't degrade and eventually have to be destroyed. But if that was not the intent of that discussion, if you don't feel comfortable with that, we wanted clarity in the code because it was very unclear what could be done, and there were things that were being done that staff didn't know how it should be handled because the code didn't speak to that. So that's what we want to do. We want to address it, and if you don't want repairs to be permitted, we can change that. But that was my understanding from that previous conversation.
Yeah, repairs are fine. I don't think we wanted decks, though. Like a deck, you can make a deck small or whatever. But like the main structure, absolutely a repair. But if you're going to renovate it, if you're doing a permit to renovate or whatever, no. Yeah, you can maintain it until such time as you're going to be rebuilding in the proper location.
So would it be appropriate to make the change repairs to existing primary structures? So that wouldn't include decks, that wouldn't include gazebos, anything
Yes.
like that?
To me, I'm saying yes.
So I just want to caution you about this because you tend to have scope creep on these types of things. And
What do you mean by scope creep?
well, it's the old, you start by switching out a light switch and next thing you know, you're redoing your kitchen. So, people come in and say, well, I just want to replace 3 boards. And, then we get a call from a neighbor that, they're building a house. So I just want to caution you about that. And let's be sure that we all have the same, not only conceptual definition so that we get a good word definition of what I'm calling minor repairs that are allowed when you do have these encroachments, if that's the intent of the council.
I think it is. I mean, the example she gave in a storm or something where you sort of have an emergency repair or the window gets broken, that's something. But then,
But if your deck got ripped up, you wouldn't be able to replace it.
Right.
It would have to go back. Does everybody agree with that?
My only concern is if you limit it in that fashion, what if you have a safety issue? I think we need to have to allow people to make repairs that keep a structure safe.
Do you mean, for instance, if there was a door at the back and the deck was rotting away?
If there's a
That was a
railing to
means of-
keep a kid from falling off or something like that, that's a concern I would have, that
So,
people need to be able to make repairs that are necessary for safety.
I think the way that I would suggest that you deal with that is that you say what you want to do, and then you leave it to the building official to say, you know what, you can go forward and do this because there's a safety issue involved. And we deal that all the times, whether it's someone who needs emergency air conditioning repair or roof repair or window repair. We deal with that on a daily basis as people didn't think they had a problem, and then we get a rainstorm and all of a sudden they have a problem. We don't want to make them go through a protracted process to fix it. But, so I wouldn't be necessarily concerned about that because we could deal with that through the building officials' emergency powers. But I'd be more concerned about the fact that when a repair generates an opportunity to correct the encroachment, are we going to force the correction, or are we going to let it just continue to be repaired and pretty much stay in perpetuity? Because in many cases, if you repair it in pieces, you could almost keep it going indefinitely.
So I guess what I would say to Sarah is, we just need to, I like what it says, but it needs more explanation. And the suggestion you had is a good addition.
and go ahead.
No,
Anita.
no, go ahead, Joanne.
No, it's okay, because they were going to take expansion off of there anyway. The part about expansion is not allowed at all anyway. That would be plain crossed off. That's the only comment I was going to make. Sorry.
Ray, can I just throw in a thought before I get to you?
Go right ahead.
So I don't know if this house pertains to this or not, but I'm thinking about the Gottlieb's house on Aberdeen. So you have which I know they're new owners, but it will forever, to me, be the Gottlieb house. So I'm thinking, the people, I understand the new owners of that property are Mr. and Mrs. King. I congratulate them on rehabbing that property because it's really beautiful what they've done. But I wonder about properties that we are happy to keep. I'm sure they must have done something to the deck there because it looks very nice. Maybe it wasn't that good of a shape, I don't know. But are there exceptions to that rule?
But,
it may
they're
not be-
inside,
they're inside
they're
the line?
landward of the CCL.
Okay. Well, let's just say that they
There's
were
very
just-
few. I'll tell
Okay.
you, for instance, my husband and I looked to buy an additional beachfront property at one point, and we looked, and there was a deck that was about 2 feet wide, very unusable. You walk out the door and you just stand there. You couldn't put a chair there, so we thought,
It
oh,
was a
well.
viewing gallery.
It's a viewing gallery. And we thought, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that, whatever. And you realize that deck was right against the CCL line. So you couldn't put 2 more feet on. And in all honesty, anybody who went to buy that would recognize, if I wanted a different house, I need to tear the old one down, or I need to live with it the way it is. There are very few actually that are honestly across the line, because that coastal construction line was almost drawn around the buildings that were there in 1978. So like Wicked Wings, I think, is one where it's across. Top of Mast might be across. There's very few that are actually across the line, because the line it goes right in front of the houses, right where they were when you follow the line. So it's not a big problem. It's a very unique problem.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the EC line here, but we're also, don't forget, we occasionally have cases with non-conforming structures that someone wants to try to do a repair to, whatever, and you could probably remember a case not too long ago that we had someone in that set of circumstances, and we said, look, go to the council and they'll tell you whether you have to sort of bring it into 100% compliance or 50% compliance or 80% compliance or 0% compliance. And that person came in front of the council. They made their case why they wanted to be allowed to do what they wanted to do. You heard that case. You asked questions. The neighbors had a chance to come in and express their concerns if they had any. And it was dealt with in a public forum, which I believe was a very appropriate way to do it. So although it's a little bit of a different category, a lot of the circumstances are pretty much
Okay.
the same.
You understand where I'm coming from, though. I don't want to preclude the Mr. and Mrs. Kings of the world from taking a property like that, and instead of clearing it and building big, they rehab it. It is preserving the nature of our town, and that character is important to me.
Also note that things like decks, that would be a minor structure, so if they want to rebuild that on the, over the EC line, they would have to come before you for a special exception.
Okay.
So that there isn't a way for them to, there is an option for them to do those things, but you would help decide.
Thank you, Sarah. Ray, anything to add? Okay. Roxanne?
I'm
Or
sorry.
you're not finished? No, I
that
can't
was
figure it
just
out.
that one topic,
Okay,
sorry.
go ahead. No, that was a good topic.
Okay, so the next thing, I guess, it's in several spots here. It's on page 137, where you look at D and then 4. It's renumbered to 4, outdoor education or lifeguard support stands. Where do we anticipate having lifeguard support stands?
There were some at one time at Lynn Hall Park, but there's never been any anywhere else,
Okay,
at
it
least in
was-
my knowledge.
It was something that was previously in the code. We didn't want to lose that if that was something that was desirable.
I just, I mean, when I look, you've got 3 county parks and a Newton Park, and then that's it. And there's no place else, really. Do we want private properties having lifeguards? I mean, I don't see keeping that in there as anything that's by right in any permitted uses. Why would we have that? That almost creates it by right. And that moves us then into,
Anybody disagree with that? Okay, go ahead, Joanne.
Over onto the, sorry, let me get my page. Why am I not finding it? Because it's my biggie. Here we go. Wait a minute. Okay. Now we go to page 143. I'm skipping over to 143 on minor structures includes, because it's the same topic. Minor structures, pile-supported elevated dune and beach walkover structures, beach access ramps and walkways, stairways, and obviously we have those at Newton, we have them where needed for elevation changes at our, whatever. But pile-supported elevated viewing platforms, gazebos, boardwalks, lifeguard support stands, public and private bathhouses, sidewalks, driveways, parking areas, shuffleboard courts, tennis courts, handball courts, racquetball courts. So it goes through this whole list of things, none of which should be in the EC zone. So why are they defined and where are they prohibited? Because where would we ever allow them?
I'll note that that is the current definition.
Okay.
And that we provided two different definitions. The attorney provided one from the Florida Administrative Code, it's right below that. I had provided a different one on page 141. So you have really two new options, because we don't like that definition. It's too much for minor structures.
Well, but what, I mean, we've always only allowed for a minor structure like, let's say, a volleyball net, sort of a removable thing. Or we all know that we have the single post cheekies sometimes out there. I don't know why we would have anywhere in here any definition that would imply that we allow anything more than that.
It was the current definition.
So my point being, I want a very narrow definition.
So do
Because I
either
just
of-
don't see the reason to have that open definition.
Do you have a preference for either the one from the Florida Administrative Code or the one provided on page 141?
Yours is
Or
very clear.
do you want to have some other combination of definitions that's more appropriate?
Well, I don't know why we'd say building, a small accessory structure or building. I don't know why that word would be even in there. So that concerns me. So I guess I would define even smaller than minor. To me, a minor structure would not be a building.
A building would be a shed. Could it be a shed?
Could be a shed.
And we're going to have sheds in the EC zone?
No, we shouldn't.
I just don't see where any building would be in the EC zone. Not even a she shed.
She should.
Well, we removed from the permitted structures section, if you go back to page 137, D 9, we removed minor structures. We removed minor. So now it says temporary movable structures. So that is by right, temporary movable. So a minor structure would be something like a boardwalk. That's more than a temporary movable structure. So we need a definition for what a minor structure would be that they could request a special exception for. It's not something that you would say, by right, you can have this thing.
My
It was
point
a-
is, I don't know why we would even allow them to even ask for it. My opinion is, in the EZ zone, we don't even allow them to ask for it,
So
a minor
If they
structure,
have-
other than just the ones that are a single post gazebo thing.
what
No
about a
buildings.
boardwalk? Should they be able to ask for not a boardwalk, a dune walkover? Because that's a structure.
Well, and and that's another topic. With the dune walkovers, we're talking about changing the height and all that. That's in another part of how high they can be. You know, it's interesting because on our beach, you don't build big dunes. It's difficult. I happen to have one, but it runs this way, the way the sea oats collect. So in this code, we actually need to allow people to put a pathway through their dunes. And we need to allow, like the town needs a boardwalk or a dune walkover to get for an elevation change. Or someone like in the downtown where they have that existing wall and they need to make an elevation change. But for the essence of just walking over, I'm not sure why we need them or we would allow them, because we know that they're detrimental to the beach.
We included the additional requirement for a dune walkover when required to protect indigenous plant communities and when elevation change exists, so that there are specific instances when they're allowed, and they're not allowed in all instances. You can't just say, I would like a dune walkover in my backyard, but you don't have a dune. So you actually have to have a dune, you have to have the vegetation, you have to have the elevation change. Those are the instances where it's appropriate to allow one, and then they can ask for a special exception. With the, I understand what you're saying. My concern is that we don't want to eliminate the option for them to come forward to ask for it,
Right.
if they feel it's appropriate. And along the lines of creating pathways, our code currently explicitly disallows damage to that vegetation in the dune. So that would be a different environmental issue that I
Right,
can't
but-
really, I'm not prepared to speak to today.
But my point is, I think that we want to encourage the narrow pathway as compared to
Be
the
thinking
building
of
of
that.
structures.
Yep.
And that's my concern. Because, okay, I'm just, I know from living on the beach, from the experience, in hurricane season, we let that pathway get very narrow. We can hardly walk through it, and it's angled such that we know how the storms are coming. But we also haven't put up a wood thing that is in itself detrimental to the EC zone. I would really like it if we're changing this, that we also make sure that people can just do the pathways. Otherwise, they'll come in and say, I can't get through my sea oats, I have to put this structure.
I'm also unsure if state law allows it, so we would have to do
Well, I
quite a bit
think
of
our
research
dune
into that.
planting vegetation thing has a thing where you have access through it, so we need to check on that.
Currently, you cannot do
You
that.
cannot, okay. Well,
That's-
I
yes.
do, by the way, I do.
Well, you
Oh,
can't,
if you
you
can
can't,
within,
you can't remove dune, and you can't,
But the property owner, by state statute, I cannot, if I'm not the property owner, I can't pull out the COs. If I'm the property owner, I can pull those out by state law. I'm allowed to maintain and do that. I mean, there's a state thing about that.
So-
But anyway, you get the point. I don't need to fight the details, but
And I'd
in
like
the
to revisit
theory,
that too.
in the theory is that we want to encourage the ability to have a pathway through, so we don't have to all build these, because then there's the other thing that comes up with how far apart they have to be. They have to all be 150 feet apart. My neighbor's property is only 40 feet wide, mine's 65, the next person's 40. How does one person get to walk over their dune and the other two don't? Now what do we do? And just like a shared driveway, people on the beachfront don't want to share a dune walkover. I don't want to share a driveway with somebody else. I like my own driveway at my own house. If I'm going to have a dune walkover, then you're going to have them closer than that. They're going to be closer to 150 feet. So that's why I don't like the way it is. So you understand my point of view.
so do we disallow dune? I mean,
So I
what would
think,
you like me to do?
yeah, I think the question is this. What items, if any, do we want to allow by right? I mean, maybe the answer to that is none. Which ones do we want people to come in here and be able to, through a public hearing process, be granted the right to have? So, maybe the better thing to do at this point is to, and again, and maybe there are things that apply to the EC that don't apply to other areas. So, and clarifying that. So I guess what would be helpful is that, are you at the point where you want to say, like, basically, well, look, if you're going to DNEC, we want sort of public notice, so everyone knows what's going on. It's not a surprise to anybody that something gets built there, regardless of how minor it may be. So, where's that line? And as it pertains to other areas, we can try to clarify it by what's by right and what you have to come before and through the planning, LPA and town council to potentially get permission for. And then the group of things that they're just absolutely not allowed.
Well, I think that temporary movable things are great, and I actually would like your feedback. I was going to ask your feedback, because I noticed there's a bunch of houses now that have put in the single stock cheeky little huts. There's a few more. There's a whole strip of houses, there's another whole strip of houses, so now there's probably 10 or 12 in a row. They kind of look cute. I'm wondering, from the community development point of view, do you see them as an issue, a positive or negative? I don't have a strong feeling about it, and I don't know if they're inside the EC or outside on the particular properties, but some new ones have been put up.
So I'm not aware of any of those, so they haven't requested permits. The way this code is written currently, I mean, we're proposing, it says permitted uses and structures, and the previous code would be a little bit more liberal in this sense. So that would be permitted, because that would be considered a temporary, movable, occasional minor structure. So I think
Even though
that-
it's the ones with the grass hut, the grass skirt and the strong wood posts, and
I think it would depend on whether it was movable.
they're not movable. These are
So they're
permanent.
concreted into the ground, because then there would be an issue, because that would have to do with FEMA, essentially.
So I'm not sure how to resolve these. That's your job. But I'm sorry, I'm mentioning from my point of view what I hope to be clear. And as you can see, I'm just really strong about this, that we don't cross the EC line. It was created, and when we do give up, I mean, I have over 7,000 square feet that's platted over the east side line. I'm residential multifamily, I'd love to build another house out there. So, I mean, I hurt myself too. I don't think we should cross the line. That's how I feel. And I think the wording needs to be clear about it. We don't cross the line. I don't know how everybody else feels.
I agree with you, Joanne, and I guess I would say if there's a special exception, it has to come here, but I can't imagine what the special exception is. Roxanne?
I was just going to mention ADA problems. I think if you get too restrictive with the walkovers, then you've got an ADA issue. So I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
But that would be somebody who would come for a special exception for
Well,
that.
but should you have to come for a special exception if you're handicapped?
No?
It costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's,
Well, and that's, on the zoning side, that's always a struggle. Building code obviously
Right.
deals with the ADA stuff a little bit more, but that's always the struggle, because at the time, a person lives there, they have a issue that they need to get access to the beach, they move, that structure stays. So there's always those thoughts to consider, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about the money part, only because the council could always say that for that application, we were not
but
going
the
to
general
charge.
public doesn't understand that, and they don't even apply because they think
Right.
it costs too much money.
Well, but, the flip side of a lot of things, and I hate to sort of be, talk about the sort of underbelly of humanity is that some cases, I see people with, Lamborghinis that are 18 inches off the ground with handicap stickers in them. So we just have to be cognizant of
The
both
fact
sides
that-
of
the
both
fact
sides
that-
of the issue.
The fact that some people are horribly abusive of the situation doesn't mean that I'm going to punish somebody who's had a stroke and wants to get out to the beach.
I understand, so we have to find a way
Roxanne,
that
if you
deals with the
had
median.
I'm going to just use, I'm going to use Joanne's house just because I have an idea of what it looks like going out there. Let's just say someone handicapped purchased that house, are you saying because the house would be elevated, they would need something elevated to go down to the beach? Or once they're on the beach, crossing that dune, wouldn't a Moby mat through a path work just as well?
It
I'm
might,
trying to see what you're thinking.
it might.
Okay.
I was throwing it out there as a
Yeah, as a
consideration.
consideration, okay. Okay, anything else, Joanne?
No, I think I made myself pretty clear about how strongly I feel about it. And, we have to remember over and above that the sea turtles come and nest all the way up there. And every time we've got more structures and more whatever, we're adding into those issues. And I just want to protect our EC zone.
Roxanne?
And Joanne, I don't want you to get the impression I disagree with you.
I understand that.
I also agree to keep as little as possible out there.
Have anything to add?
And speaking of not being, everyone being agreeable, I agree that we need to be
Oh,
is
you've
helpful.
already buried yourself with the
No, I mean,
Lamborghini
I think we
comment.
need to.
So you can just simmer down, Aaronstadt.
We need to help people deal with human issues.
Sure, of course, of course.
But we also have to be aware of the other side of things.
Roxanne, you have anything to add in this
Nothing else.
section? Ray, anything to add
On that subject, I
on,
agree with,
on this whole section?
I agree with what Roger said there. And I also agree with Joanne. I share your passion for not violating that line. So it would have to be something very compelling to consider violating that. That's it.
Okay. Got all the direction you need, or anything else, Sarah?
For clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
So you don't want to allow buildings as a special exception of any kind? So we can just remove building from that
I would remove building.
definition and,
Yep.
okay.
Yes, ma'am. Anything else, Jason? Okay, thank you, folks, very much. We'll move on to the next item, which is a proposed update to the town's code enforcement regulations. Roger?
Right, so, well, the first thing is on your green sheet. It's not the best pictures, it's the best practices. We've looked at our land development, our code enforcement regulations, and like several other items you've talked about this morning, they have not really been modified over the years in such as that they're not what I would call the best practices that are being used by many other municipalities, and therefore the question becomes is this something you want us to take a look at and potentially bring back a code revision for, or you're comfortable with how the current code is working at this
Roger,
point in time?
I think you may be referring to something that I don't have anyway.
It's
I don't-
just, we just have one page.
We have one
that's-
page.
Yeah,
That is correct.
that's correct. Yeah, there's nothing,
It says attached, but we have nothing attached.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it didn't get, we have a draft, I believe.
That is, I will accept responsibility. Staff had prepared a draft document and asked me to review it, and I'm like 95% through the process of reviewing it. The problem, if I may, is that I'm very particular. I'm maybe a perfectionist. So there were some things that in the draft that, you know, I had identified were issues of concern from a legal standpoint, and already begun the process of revising it. I will send that to you, but I want to touch upon the highlights of what the document is proposed to look like, as the manager has indicated, about updating best practice, and to dovetail to some degree with some of the conversations this council has had with myself and as well as with staff about some issues that are going on in the community about how do we encourage better compliance with code, and ultimately catch some of these properties that are creating problems, large liens and things of that nature. And a couple of things that we would like some feedback from you all is, you know, do we put in an updated ordinance, you know, language such as that, you know, we won't provide or issue permits or approvals to properties that have outstanding code violations. That is something that is in the draft that staff has prepared. And before we, you know, finalize the document and put it on for the consideration by the public first reading and by you all, you know, get some feedback on some of those issues, if that is something that you all find acceptable and want for us to, you know, follow through. Another component that staff has come forward with is to take advantage of the existing state statute that allows for the issuance of citations as opposed to a notice of violation. There's basically two procedures under code enforcement that staff can proceed with: a written notice of violation or issuance of citation. And the way that the citation format is being proposed to be set up is much like a traffic ticket. You get the ticket, you can pay the fine and discharge the violation, or you can ask for a hearing before the special magistrate. What we're putting in, and what we're proposing is a wrinkle, which is, the citation is a very good mechanism to enforce the code for what I would call, spot violations. But unfortunately, sometimes even spot violations recur and persist. And what we're proposing to write into the ordinance, assuming you all give us the thumbs up, as Rexanne did a moment ago, is that after the third citation, you don't have the opportunity to either discharge by paying the penalty or asking a hearing before the special magistrate. We're going to send you to county court. And you're going to have to appear before a county court judge and explain why you continue to violate the code. And we believe that will enhance the ability of staff and the town to obtain compliance on some of these properties that continue to abuse the privilege by not complying with the code.
Okay, is that it, John?
Yes.
All right, Ray, would you like to start with this conversation?
I like those suggestions. I like the idea of the citation. I like the idea of, after 3, move it on. I think those are positive. We know who we're talking about here. We're talking about the habitual offenders here, and everybody else is pretty much in compliance most of the time. So I'm all for tightening that up.
Roxanne?
I like what I'm hearing, but I would like you make reference to citations as being a newer state procedure that's been authorized.
It's been out there for a number of years, but I don't, from having come to the town, staff would like to use it a little bit more aggressively.
Okay, I would like in a future packet to have that set out. What's the difference between the two? Between a notice of violation and a citation, because I'm not sure that I understand the difference.
Okay.
So if you could set that out for us.
We will. I mean, it's in our code right now. The citation format exists within our code already. What we're proposing to do is to strengthen that citation process, as I said, by, in some instances, we have a particular piece of property where we issued, I think it was close to 60, 70 citations.
Right, and I'm
day
with
after
you on
day
that.
after day.
I'm with you on that, but I guess I'd like to know when we're using citations and when we're using a notice of violation and why, because I really don't understand that. I'm just admitting my ignorance to you, and please educate me.
No, fair enough.
And the other thing that I would mention is I don't think it needs, in fact, I don't think I'd want it to be part of an ordinance, but in conjunction with this, I'd like to see us develop a policy for code enforcement where certain things automatically, it's a safety issue, so you automatically get a notice of violation. But if it's way down here in importance, that we have an automatic warning for certain things. So I'd like to see a tiered structure, and I think Roger had mentioned that he was thinking about this before. And it would be kind of an internal policy that would be good to be discussing at the same time we're looking at this.
You've mentioned that several times. It's
that's
a
fine.
great idea.
So if we could kind of do that all together, because it relates.
Right. The guy who's parked on the side of the street with his tires on the road gets a warning because he's at a party, as opposed to a ticket, unless he's blocking somebody else's entrance or exit. Anyway, go ahead, Joanne.
I agree with everything that's been said, and, I've looked to, I always think it's interesting, there's a balance. Most people are good citizens and want to respect their neighbors and their neighborhoods and want to follow the code. And people do occasionally make a mistake or try to get away with a little something. When they get caught, they recognize it and accept responsibility. And then you have the others. I do like what Benita does, not to soften the concept of enforcement, because it needs to be strong, but I do like that they call it neighborhood and community services. And there, I noticed that they're letter, their first letter that goes out for these minor things that we're talking about is something like, were you aware that our town adopted the International Property Maintenance Code to assist in maintaining a safe and orderly community for all to enjoy, ? A neighborhood services representative noticed the following issues. Here they are. Please contact us to correct these immediately by such and such a date or whatever. But it's still the same. I just warned you, but I kind of warned you nicely and gave you the benefit of the doubt that you weren't aware.
I agree 100%.
So it's sort of all
Yep.
about the word. It's not really,
Yep.
and it goes with what you're saying, Rexanne. Who gets this nice letter and who gets, you just took a beam out of a condo and the upper condo is about to fall. You know, those are two different issues. So at any rate, that's my only contribution.
One of the things that we're doing, that the ordinance is proposing to do is to change the terminology from, code enforcement to code compliance. We want to go even more friendlier than that, please provide us suggestions and we'll do that. But universally, everything that currently says code enforcement will now say code compliance, because that is the emphasis.
I think you just got a great suggestion from Joanne. Look at Bonita Springs and what they do.
Okay.
It is and I'm sure they have very good compliance, but I would talk to them, because just calling it something different and having something that, when whoever is out there on the road and they see, the lawn or whatever, they get that letter, or they get that notice, but it is advising them, because maybe they didn't know. So let's just assume that they don't, and be kind to them and inform them. So I would look at Bonita Springs. Couldn't agree with you more. Anything else on this issue?
No.
No, so we'll
Roger?
proceed to try to work on a draft and
Be the kinder,
incorporate the
gentler nation.
instructions and suggestions from the council.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Hey,
Roxanne, did you have something?
well, I just noticed that we've got a lot of LPA people pulling in for their 10:30, and I don't want to keep them waiting. Can we adjourn our work session, do our LPA thing, and then come back?
Well, could I just ask you, the only thing we have left is departmental reports and agenda management.
Yes, and this is the third time in a row I've complained that
Hold on.
it's always at
Don't-
the end.
The LPA can sit here for 10 minutes.
I've got more than 10 minutes.
You've got more than 10 minutes.
We spent more than 10 minutes on it every time before.
On which?
On
Well, the
the
departmental
monthly reports.
Okay, well, the monthly reports, the only person asking us for any council action is the utility department. It's on page 188.
7. I'm counting how many pages I have notes on. I'm up to 7 pages so far. 8.
Rex, could I just ask you, are these notes that are something that you can go over with that person, or is it something that you need public discussion on? Because these are meant to be reports.
I understand that, but I don't feel we've ever really understood the reports. And every time I've not done most of my questions because I've been trying to be nice.
Is there any
So-
objection to
Now,
do?
I'd love to hear what Ray and Joanne have to say.
That's what I'm just asking. And,
If you've gone through the trouble to make 9 pages worth of notes, they ought to be heard. And I don't mind taking another 10 minutes after the end of the LPA meeting.
Joanne, you have any problem with that?
No, it's fine. I don't know how.
Just have to move them
it
along.
Unless the LPA wants to hear some of these things.
We will adjourn.
Which sounds like no.
We will recess the,
They're happy to wait.
okay. Go ahead, Roxanne.
They don't want
Keep
to miss
going.
this fun stuff.
It's going to be something insightful.
No, it is.
Well, go ahead. Roxanne, we'll let you lead off here. And let's, do
Okay.
you want to start with the principal discussion of what are the reports meant to accomplish? Roger?
Madam Mayor and members of the council, I incorporated the report system because when I came to work here on the beach, I would have to say there, some of the councils had a level of distrust that things were being worked on by the staff that they weren't aware of. So I also, in some cases, some of the councils felt that things were sort of migrating to the agenda that they didn't know that were being worked on or being contemplated. Questions about how matters were being handled operationally, et cetera, as well as in some cases, how many widgets were actually accomplished in a particular month. So we implemented the reporting system because I felt that we really do want you to be aware of what we're working on, because if we're heading in the wrong direction, we want that corrected. If you feel we're working on something that is not of a concern, we want to put our resources to working on things that are important. We want to keep you informed about what we're doing and how we're doing it to spur conversation. The council's comment when we started implementing reports is, well, that's nice, but we don't want to read through 20 pages of stuff to look for the things that you need a specific yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down on. So then we modified the reports to include a section at the header of the report to say these are specific things that, we from the staff perspective do want you to potentially discuss and give us feedback on. And the rest we kind of looked as information. So that's the genesis of the reports. We wanted to make sure that in the council section, when you asked us to look at something, we specifically called that out and let you know that we did, and that the answer to that item is in the reports. So that's how that was the intent, and that's what we've been trying to do. And to the extent that there are matters within the reports that are worthy of public discussion, then let's have that discussion.
First of all, I'd like to say that I love the reports. That's the reason I have so many questions about them. And as a person who has fairly recently been reelected with a director, a town manager that is different than the one that I worked with before, I'm learning a great deal from these, and I have questions about them. I don't want to come across that I'm attacking. I love the information. I want to learn more. And just to go on and start off on the very first page, Chad Chutz is our interim environmentalist. I don't know why why is he interim? And
First page in this has to do with the community development. Am I missing something?
Yeah, it's the community development report, the first item. 146. She's referring to. She's on page
Okay.
146.
Okay, go ahead.
so her stuff is different than mine.
I looked
So-
at it online. Go ahead, go ahead.
So to answer your specific question, we as everyone knows, Ray Burns left. We have Chad, who's in providing those services to us right now. Whether that'll be a long-term solution or not is yet to be determined. So that's why the word interim is there.
I guess that really doesn't answer my question. Why? Why is he interim? Why haven't we just hired somebody?
Well, because we're not sure that, we want to be sure that anybody, Chelsea was the interim public works manager for a while because I do things that way, that people are interim until they prove to us that they could do the job and meet all our needs. He's commuting here. Whether he's going to want to continue that's something he's feeling out. So he's not what I would call a full-fledged employee at this particular point in time.
Okay, well, I guess I'm expressing to you that I don't feel comfortable with that scenario, and I don't know if my fellow counselors agree with me. When you hire someone, they're on probation. They don't need to be called an interim. I'd like to know that we got somebody and that we're spending all this time training them and they're going to be around.
I agree with you, Roxanne.
I actually
Let's see.
respectfully disagree, because I think that the town manager is the one that hires and fires. And he's greatly experienced, and if he finds that calling them interim and letting them know clearly that this is just an interim position, it gives him a little more freedom in review their performance and discussion before bringing them all full-time and making it harder to get rid of an employee, I think that that's his judgment to make. So I actually appreciate that.
To give you a specific example, with this position in particular, this person gives out violations to very strong businesses on the beach who complain about receiving turtle violations. And if that person is looked at as an interim, then they'd have no strength in their position. So in particular, this is one that I don't like seeing the interim on.
But I think the person that's brought in has been a year with the DEP, has worked on another barrier island, and is very aware of the
Yes, but for
state
us, they're
statute.
still interim. I think what it does is if I could just elaborate on the interim notion or the temporary notion, it makes the whole government seem temporary. I know I have a different point of view than has been expressed to you in the past, Roger, completely different point of view, but as soon as somebody comes through that door and gets a paycheck, I want to know that they are all in. If you want to be interim, if you don't think you're going to like the traffic, if you're whatever, then contemplate that before you walk in the door, because when you walk in the door, you're part of the team, and the team is all in or all out.
Well, I think, with all due respect to you all, that whether you believe it or not, whether someone comes in and says that they're all in, we interview them and they're interviewing us. And we may be able to, we may convince ourselves they're all in or not, but they're not all in until they're here, they do the job, and they like the job and like the people they're working with. If not, they're here and they're applying the next day for a job somewhere else. So I think that, people.
So in your mind, everybody's interim.
Well, in my mind is that if we, we try to create a positive work atmosphere where we can attract the very best people to work at and work with us and enjoy working with their colleagues. And, when someone says, I'm applying for a job and I want to work here for 40 years, in an interview, I really don't, really buy into that. I appreciate the fact that that people want to come here and do a good job for us, and people are honest in the interview process, and they say to us, "Hey, I think this is going to be a great fit for me, and I hope you think I'll be a great fit for you, but we're not. It's still a honeymoon. It's not a marriage yet." And I believe that's the case for pretty much any employee, whether they admit it or not.
Going on, and I mentioned, I don't want to give this too much weight, but I do want to mention it. I understand that Chad comes from Marco, and I keep hearing that people that are hired here come from Marco. And I'm sure that people that have worked for Marco are qualified, but there's a growing perception in the town that we're hiring people from Marco. So I'm just mentioning that. The other thing I would mention is, I think that I mentioned to Roger in private some time ago that I'd like to get an email when we hire somebody new, because I don't like walking into town hall and, for example, with Chad, I didn't even know that he worked here when I walked into the room. So because we're if it were a big town, you couldn't do this. But in a small town, I'd like to know. I'd like to get an email that says, we've hired somebody new. Her name is Jane Smith. She has all of these qualifications, et cetera, et cetera. So I just mentioned that. I don't know if my fellow counselors agree with me that they'd like to receive an email when we have somebody new.
I think that'd be very nice. I mean, it certainly is all Roger's prerogative, but it'd be nice to know who the people are.
Okay, moving on, still on page 146, under zoning, DO applications this month, and the number 2 and the word 2 to date 19, and the same thing underneath it. I don't understand what that means. Does anybody else understand what that means?
Patty, you want to come up?
For the month, for the
Patty?
year.
Under zoning, there's 2 bullet points, and it says DO applications this month, and 2, the number 2, and then the word 2, date 19.
I think it's year-to-date.
Okay, it's supposed to be year-to-date?
I believe so.
Development orders?
Yes.
Okay, So that's year-to-date. So year-to-date, we've had 19 development orders and 2 this month.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, under short-term rentals, on the next page, I've been receiving lots of emails about people that are having problems with advertising about weekly. They are allowed to have a short-term rental for 1 week out of a month, even if they're not in a weekly zone, and people are being cited for that? Am I the only one that's received these emails?
Nope, I've got it too.
Is that something that we're working on?
Well,
It's relative to condominiums.
no, there's 2 different issues, I think, that
Okay.
are being discussed. So the initial question was, if you are allowed to, if you're in a monthly zone, can you rent for a week and not for 30 days? And that is correct, as long as you only rent for 1 week in
Right.
that month. That is correct.
Right.
Sometimes people receive, based on how their advertisement might appear in the, on the internet, we can't tell what they're doing, so they may receive a notice, and as you said, one of you said earlier, we could always make the notices to sound more friendly.
So for example, somebody had, the house next door to me, she oftentimes rents a week out of her monthly rental.
Right, I get that. And
But if
And
it- if
because
it's-
you're allowed to do that, you are allowed to advertise it, and I don't know why we're even sending them a notice, because they're not doing anything wrong.
Right, but it appears that it's a weekly rental.
But
Yeah, I get it. I understand what you're
they're
saying.
allowed
Liz.
to advertise,
Yep.
because they are allowed to rent for 1 week out of the month. So they're not violating, and if our statute is written that they are, it needs to be corrected.
No, it's a problem in us not being sure what they're doing based on how their ad looks on the internet.
So
And
maybe,
you're not allowed to punish somebody because we're not sure what they're doing.
maybe a
Well, we're
call,
communicating to them that if I believe what we're doing is we're communicating to them is if you are doing X, you're in violation. And that's what we're communicating to them, but we could take a look at the wording and see,
Okay.
make sure it's clear.
And there was a second issue about short-term rentals?
yeah, well, it's just something that Roger's working on about condominiums.
Okay.
Right, so just to give you an update, since you mentioned that, Madam Mayor, unbeknownst to us, there are some condominiums that are, within their condominium documents, and this, I believe, not only predates the recent change to the short-term rental ordinance, but the original short-term regulations, that their condominiums allow them to rent less than weekly. We were unaware of that.
There weren't many, I think there was only one or something.
Whatever they were-
But it was weekly was mostly the concern, that, yes, go ahead.
So they contacted the mayor and I had a meeting with a couple of the people who have concern, and I said that we would A, stop enforcement, and B, bring forward a potential change to the code to deal with that issue for the council to consider. And that's been drafted, it's under legal review, and will probably show up at your next council meeting for a first reading item.
The glitch there occurred because when the town first, and Dan and Jane are there, they'll remember this, when we talked about short-term rentals, we never contemplated condominiums because they had their own rules. And so they were not contemplated in the short-term rental ordinance. And so then, as we included them in the last version, when they were included, it then created a glitch, a big glitch.
Yeah, just to be clear, I think it's a duration issue. It's not whether condominiums are concluded or not. I don't know that anybody was aware of that. We had these condominiums in the monthly zone that were renting weekly or less.
That's the issue.
On the next page, 148, under turtle nesting season, we've had 10 nest disorientations. And this is another reason I brought up the whole thing about the environmental officer. My understanding from speaking and reading about turtle time and other issues, we have one of the worst records for disorientations. That, and we have less speech than a lot of other people. So I'm concerned that maybe our environmental officer is being assigned to other duties and should be doing more enforcement of our beach, that we have the worst disorientation record, 10 on our little tiny beach.
So we continue to do a one-night surveillance every week. We, in fact, he was in to talk to me about some violations he noted and are under the enforcement process just the other day from his inspection. There are two ways or two issues. One is an issue of, is it, a common area of the building? Individual rooms. And right now, with individual rooms, if we believe that the proprietor is making a good faith effort to educate and warn the individual guests of the rooms that we're not citing them. If it's a common area, we are, but we can change that if the council would like us to.
Well, is that why we think we have the worst record? Is because of that? I mean, other beaches have people who are rentals and...
Well, to your other point, for example, our former environmental technician took care of the beach and chair licenses, and we're reassigning that. So we want to be sensitive to the issue that you had raised privately with me and now publicly today about, is the environmental position being asked to do too much?
Just on that topic, I also want to mention, we even have a problem. FPL installed new drop-down lights at the south end of the island that are non-compliant. I mean, we have a lot of problems that even relate to the lighting along the boulevard that our town has not been able to get anything from FPL to do properly, so. It's not just the homeowners.
Oh, yeah. I went out several times with Ray, and I saw the huge number of violations she was writing up, and I was being told stories by Turtle Time people that some of these people, week in, week out, continue to violate, and we don't seem to be taking care of that problem if we're having this many disorientations. Moving on to page 150. At the top, it says test data was received from Lee County and is being reviewed by the environmental staff. Is that the stuff that's on the next page? Is that what we received? Because it's not clear to me. That is what we received.
Yes.
And since it's being reviewed by Chad, is he going to be coming back to us with a report about this?
In the next month's report, we will share his thoughts on that.
Maybe he could be here.
Because it looks like Buccaneer is bad. That's the one that jumps out at me, that it's on both the charts that it's high, the highest one. The information that's on page 153, is that the impact stuff that Bruce asked for?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to mess with that because that's Bruce's baby. Unless somebody else has comments about it. On page 161, I think this is a code case page. Turtle conservation, we only issued 4 citations in the month of August. when in May we issued 93 and in June we issued 60? And-
Yes.
And are we issuing then a citation when we do have a disorientation?
When we observe a violation or have an affidavit from Turtle Time that there's been a violation, yes.
And the parking category can't be right because it's only got 2 in the month of March and has none in the other.
Yeah, that's not our base parking staff, that's our code enforcement parking staff.
Example of that?
Yeah, so the base parking staff that's dealing with the meters and parking, on-street parking tickets and all that, that's the base staff.
Right. And what are these?
I don't know what those 2 tickets are, I'd have to go look them up. May have been the base employee who helps out in code with postings, whatever sort of situations.
I did see Allison back there. Is Allison still back there? Yeah, page
Yes.
173, the painting of the Newton exterior of the college, isn't it planned until 2021? That seems like a long time away to me. Next year is 2020. Says 2021. Just wondered, I mean, I painted my own house over the weekend,
It'll be next fiscal year,
okay?
yeah. So
I
it'll
just
be
wondered if there was a
2021.
problem with it, that it was so far away. Do we have a historical issue?
We'll have to vet the color and everything. We discussed that in the strategic plan. So this year, we're doing some of the strategic planning for Newton and for the add-on list, and this will be on for the next year.
Just seemed like it was taking a long time for painting. Moving to page 178, this is something this is the table of organization for the town, and I got a bigger version of this at another meeting that I went to. It's a little more readable. But I noticed this one's color-coded for contracted workers, and I know that's something I brought up a lot at the budget hearings. But it would appear that we don't have that many contracted workers, but then when I look at it more closely, people that I'm aware of that are contracted workers aren't on here. So that's why it looks like there aren't very many contracted workers. Like, it doesn't say we have 6 contracted inspectors or whatever. And I know I went out with the stormwater cleaning crew with the vac truck, and one of the women that I talked to with that crew told me she was a contractor. So if this is what's being given to us to tell us what are contractors and what aren't, it's not answering my question.
Okay, I mean, I'll just say this, on a day-to-day basis, we have people who are contracted, we use day laborers who are contracted. So when you say someone on the VACTA crew is contracted, I don't know if they were, I don't know if they were who they were, but they're not part of the day-to-day town staff. That's what this is trying to reflect.
Okay.
If the building inspection contractor is not listed here, they should be. That
Okay.
I will grant you.
So I guess what I'm telling you is when it comes to the budget thing, this isn't going to answer my questions, because when it comes to budget, I do want to know how many day labor contractors in a typical year we are using.
Yeah,
As part of the budget.
that's a line item thing for the contractual services. There's a dollar amount that's
Right.
budgeted, and that could represent, 1,000 people or 100 people,
Okay.
depending on the need.
I just wanted to make clear, if this was to answer my question, it didn't quite do it, so. And on page 184, there is actually an item asking for council direction.
Well, I think more specifically where we want to make sure that you're aware that we try to address those 3 points that were raised by the council.
Right, and that the 16th is where we're scheduling the hazardous waste.
And cost estimate for the sidewalk, yeah.
And my question about the sidewalk is, if this is going back, one of the major reasons we're doing it is because the school is back there. Should we be asking the school district to help pay for it?
I've never heard of a case where they have, but we could ask them.
I just wondered if, is that something that is done around here? It's not done? That
It's
the
not
school
done.
district-
Sidewalks are either the responsibility of the adjacent property owner or
the
whoever has
municipality.
jurisdiction over the road.
I know when we've had some people that are going to Murph about the manatee deaths, and they were asking for more breakdown about that, so that, because the huge number of manatee deaths was a Lee County-wide thing, and maybe they really aren't happening in Estero Bay, so maybe it isn't a concern to us.
Right.
But it also doesn't break down the cause of death. So if they aren't dying from boat strikes, if they died from red tide, then we don't need to go out and do a boat education thing. So
It's not complete.
I'd like more information.
Well,
If
this
we
is, this is the information that's available. We really don't know what, what caused a particular manatee to pass
Doesn't
away.
FWC do, autopsy's not the right word.
We'll double check
necropsies.
that this is the most granular data that they
Yeah.
have.
Okay. Then we've got council direction on page 188. That's the Lazy Way thing?
So Lazy Way has 3 options, as is, one way in, one way out, and one way in, 2 ways out with a larger landscape island. I can tell you right now, I pick that one.
Christy Corey, for the record. Roger and I have been working together as part of the roadway project to try to add some landscaping on some of the side streets that we can do. This is one of the first ones that we've been able to do that on, so I wanted to give you those options.
Can you visualize? I know it only because I sat down with Roger and we talked about this, so.
I agree. Number 3.
Yeah,
And every opportunity that we have to do it along the boulevard, we should, because we're not going to get a lot of landscaping, and these are great safety features as
can you
well.
picture what they're saying? I'm going to draw it for you.
It's right
So-
here, the pictures.
I didn't see
Where
the
is it?
picture.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't
page
see a picture.
196,
Oh, okay.
195, 194. The 3
Yeah, the current,
choices.
194
Oh, there
is-
you go.
194 is the current conditions.
Okay.
195 is one way in and one way out with a smaller landscape median, and
There's 2,
on 196, you have
choice 3.
one way in, 2 ways out, a left, so someone making a left wouldn't restrict someone making a right, and you get a larger median.
But is it better for stormwater to have one way in and one way out? Or are all these equally good?
I don't believe any of these affect the stormwater.
The other good thing about choice number 3 is you get this. It broadens that whole kind of zone there. Ray, do you have a choice, 1, 2, or 3?
3 is fine with me. How about the neighbors? What are they like?
There's a
3.
hotel and yeah, Joanne would know it, that's her neighborhood. Do you have any opposition to 3, Rexanne?
No.
Okay, number 3.
Thank you.
Anything else, Rexanne?
On page 192, where we're talking about water stuff, we tested at 2.9, 3.7, and 3.4. That doesn't really tell me anything unless I know what is bad. Is 5 bad? Is 10 bad? I know we're good where we are, but how close are we to being bad?
That's the chlorine residuals.
Right.
So I'll put that information in there for you.
Great, great, thank you.
Anything else?
That's it for me.
Anything else from anyone on the staff reports?
No, I talked to Steph
Okay.
ahead of time, thanks.
We'll move on to agenda management. Anyone have anything to add or move on agenda management? I don't know that we need to add, maybe we do, Michelle, the 13th of September for Commissioner Randelli. Sarandelli, Sandelli?
Yeah, I would say we need to add that.
Yeah, just add it as a public meeting.
The only thing I have is, and I actually was going to mention it at LPA, but, with the LPA, but I'm still seeing issues with regard to the amount of fill, stormwater runoff, whatever, there's a specific example we can talk about. I'm thinking that needs to be looked at, whether it needs to be M&P'd or if it's something staff will do or whatever. I noticed, they're building up. You build close to your property lines, you have maybe a little swale in between. Those swales are not adequate to hold it when you have so much impervious surface. And I watched a neighbor's, friends of mine, neighbor house being built in Naples, and I saw that their drain gutters had to go into a stormwater pipe and whatever underneath their driveway. And I'm thinking we're going to have to do something. If you go to the end of some of these streets, these new houses
Go
are,
over to Doc Ford's and look at that. It's quite extraordinary.
you mean good, extraordinary good?
Extraordinary, crazy bad.
Yeah,
The difference is,
right.
it's just
Well,
unbelievable.
There's streets in town where it's happening too, and they're doing it right now, and they don't even have the bricks in yet, and the street's flooding as a result of it, and the neighbors are flooding. We've got to do something about it, so, but I would suspect, I don't know if we want to M&P it or hand it over to the LPA to discuss with staff, but.
I think that's an LPA's discuss with staff issue.
Well, I also think, part of your discussion with the LPA today kind of gets a little bit into that, and
Yep.
so what, we can expand upon it.
That's all, thank you.
Okay, anything from you, Ray? Rexanne?
I'm done for now.
Okay. It is 11:01. Sorry for the delay. Our meeting will stand adjourned. Could I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? And no discussion? Okay, we're out. And just give us about 5 minutes or so, and we'll reconvene with the LPA.